Hey guys, welcome back to another tab overview video. In this video I'll be covering the magic tab, what I think of each item, how good each item is, what an item's use cases are. Alrighty, let's get into it. So the Prestidigitator, it's just the tier 1 magic station, so you need this to build magic items, not much else to say here. Shadow Manipulator is the tier 2 magic station, not much else to say here, need it to build magic items. Meet Effigy. Now, this is a respawn. It takes 4 boards, 4 beard hair, and 40 HP. Generally, I wouldn't use these in Don't Starve Together, just because your better respawn options would be the Life-Giving Amulet, which is just straight up cheaper option, doesn't take health, things along those lines. So you have better options, but it is a respawn option. It's not necessarily the worst one, so. Pan Flute is an incredibly strong item. You can use it to set any enemies around you to sleep. So big use cases for this are, for instance, you can get rid of the enraged phase for Dragonfly just by using it. If enemies are chasing you and you have no way to protect yourself, you can use it. Things along those lines. Pan Flute, incredibly good item. You will get one for free by the Glamour statue 75% of the time, so normally you don't have to make one, and then you can just deconstruct it at 10% and rebuild another one, so that's what I normally do. One-man band. So most players think this item is useless, but it's really not useless. So what you use the one-man band for is you put on this piece of equipment here, and then for a certain amount of time it'll give you followers just automatically. So if you walk by bunnymen, they'll just start following you. If you walk by pigmen, they'll just start following you, and they'll be your allies. Now, it's a very short period of time, which is why most people think it's useless, just because it's high price. So I use it for, is I set it on for just a second when I have a whole bunch of pig houses close together, a whole bunch of bunnymen houses close together, and then I tell them to attack one of the other bunnymen or other pigmen and start a pig or bunnyman war. So it can be very useful for that, very similar to the Spider Queen hat. Nightlight. Now, this is another one that people seem to think is useless, but it's really not. So, as you can see, not exactly the cheapest thing, but it allows you to light up an area using Nightmare Fuel. Now, Nightmare Fuel gives an incredibly long duration of time on this. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it stays lit up for a long time. This is mostly useful for ruin spaces, where you'll already have absurd amount of Nightmare Fuel, especially in late game if you're playing as Wickerbottom with a Splumonkey farm, or Winona if you have a Splumonkey farm, either of those things. So these can be very useful for keeping a ruins base lit up. And on top of that, normally you want to go to your ruins base during summer, which is because you won't overheat there during summer, and these don't affect your ambient temperature at all, so you don't have to worry about gathering things for endothermic fires or fuel or anything along those lines, and you're not going to burn yourself and like start overheating because you're sitting next to a fire to keep the light up. Next up is Night Armor. Now this armor gives an absurd amount of protection, and it also doesn't slow you down like Marble Armor, so it can be a very good armor set. The issue is with it that it is body armor, so you can't use a backpack with it or Magiluminescence. Generally, I would not use this. It's just not worth the materials for using up a backpack slot, so it's just a matter of there's better things you can do with your resources. It's not necessarily a bad item, it's just not the best item. So Dark Sword, this is easily the strongest item in this tab, so just blatantly strongest weapon in the game. It competes with the Thulecite Club, but currently it's still better, even though they buffed it just a week or two ago to have more durability. It's just because it uses less living logs, and it will do more base damage, although the Thulecite Club will do more damage with its little tendrils that it spawns. So, especially if you're playing as Wolfgang, you really want to use Dark Swords, and just in general play Dark Swords are better. Bat. Now, this item is another item that people seem to think is useless, but it's not anymore. So, after they added Wormwood, this item can be useful specifically only on Wormwood or for his teammates. So, Wormwood can just use this to get his health back up. He doesn't have many ways to heal himself, so he hurts himself to grab the living logs, which are normally the really big issue with using bats. They're just really expensive for normal characters who don't have a wormwood to play with. And then he can just heal himself up with it. So it heals a lot more HP than it's going to cost him for those living logs. And it can be a generally good weapon for him, especially since it keeps him insane too. So it's a generally good weapon for him. But then again, Wormwood is kind of a challenge character with how bad he is, so... Belt of Hunger, this is mostly just useful on Wolfgang, but even on Wolfgang, I don't normally use it because it just takes too long to gather the supplies for. So while you use this, it slows the rate of hunger drain. The issue with it is that you have to gather Slurper pelts, which take a while to do because you have to kill a lot of Slurpers for them. And generally, it goes in the chest slot, so it's just not a super good item because it's taken up that super useful slot that you could be using for movement speed or that you could be using for extra inventory space. So I just generally don't use it. Life-Giving Amulet, best respawn in the game. Go ahead and make a whole bunch of these with your red gems. They're a great item to make. And you just keep them on the ground. Make sure that you don't hoard them all in your backpack or something because then you won't be able to use them when you die. You generally want to keep them in your general inventory slots. You can keep one there and then one at your base, maybe one at your ruins base, whatever you want to do there. Don't put them in chests. That's not a good idea because you won't be able to use them there. But if they're out on the ground, you can just haunt them and they'll bring you back to life, so they're great for that. Chilled Amulet, another item that people seem to think is useless, but it's really not. Since I normally stay underground during summer, except for to kill the shadow pieces my first time around, I will normally build one of these just to wear as I go to the surface to keep myself cold, so I don't have to really worry about all the other gear along that end, along with my umbrella, and sometimes a thermal stone, sometimes I don't though. Just to keep myself a little bit cooler as I go up there so I don't burn to death while I'm killing the shadow pieces. Nightmare Amulet. This item is very useful for killing the Fuel Weaver. A lot of players like to use it to farm Nightmare Fuel, but if you play Insane all the time like I normally do and like is the most efficient strategy, you generally just don't want to use this item for that. But it is very good for the Fuel Weaver and basically a necessity there, so you definitely need to make one for that. Fire Staff, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's a fire staff. It lights enemies on fire that are far away, so you can use it for that. Generally, not super useful of an item, but it isn't bad if you find one just around the world, though. Just generally not all that bad. It does take a couple Nightmare Fuel, which the Ice Staff actually does not. It just takes the gem and the spear. Now, that gets me into the Ice Staff. The Ice Staff is actually a very good item. So it can be used in emergency situations. Say for instance your base gets lit on fire, you can use it for that. It's extremely useful in killing certain monsters. Say for instance you don't have a pan flute while you're fighting Dragonfly. If she goes enraged, an Ice Staff is able to calm her down out of it. And then it also has certain use cases against enemies where it'll do damage to them. Say for instance with the Lave off of Dragonfly, you can kill them with it. So it's useful there. And then also, the Ice Staff actually has a whole bunch of hidden uses that people don't know about. For instance, the Ice Staff, when you hit an enemy with it, on almost every enemy, it will actually stun them. So say for instance, I can just use my normal weapon, and then when Deerclops is about to wind up his attack and attack me, I can swap to this, hit him with it, and it'll stun him, and it will reset his attack. Generally, players will only use this for very strong bosses, and there are some enemies that are immune to ice, so it will not work on them. But even some enemies that are immune to ice, it will work on. So it's kind of you have to test it out and see for yourself which enemies it works on. It doesn't work on every enemy, but it works on most enemies. Telelocator Staff. So this is useful if you need to get a Varg in a farm, or if you are playing as WX78 on your own and you need to overcharge yourself. It's useful for a couple other farm situations too, but they're very niche, so I'm not gonna go into that here. Pretty expensive as an item, you can see. It only has 5 uses, but it costs 2 living logs, 2 purple gems, and 4 nightmare fuel, so very expensive item. Telelocator Focus. So this is a very expensive item to use, but also a very useful one that you use in Gorson with the Telelocator Staff. So what you do is you place this guy down on the ground, and I'll just show you guys real quick. So you grab a couple purple gems and you put it in the slots, and then what you do is you grab this staff here, and then I believe it'll work. Yes, so it just moves him right to that spot. and uses up all the purple gems. So very expensive to use, but it can be very useful if you need to get a certain mob in an area, which is usually a Varg for our case. Oh boy, I cast again. I guess I'm over here now. Next up, we got the Akuvigil. I think that's how you say that. It will make it so that you can see an area on the map even when you're not nearby. So I'll just show you guys real quick. It just highlights that area. Now, as far as I understand, this is how it works. So it will highlight that area even if someone's not there, but as far as that goes, not particularly important. So most things aren't going to move while off map. They got to be loaded in the chunk that a player's in. So it could be useful for, say, tracking other players who are within an area or things along those lines. But, you know, not all that useful. It is also useful for seeing if lure plants popped up, but a very niche case. Mostly a multiplayer item. Moon dial tracks the phases of the moon. This is the most useless pile of garbage I've ever seen. This is the same as basically the temperature measurer and rain measurer. It's such a useless item that you should never build because you can legit just look up when these things are gonna happen. The lazy deserter, you get this one from killing Antlion, the blueprint for it. So what it does is you build 2 of them, and then you can have one person sit on one end of it and activate it, and the other person, if they activate the other end, they're going to be teleported to me. So very useful item in multiplayer, extremely useful, but it takes a while to get it since you do have to wait until that first summer. Clean sweeper. This item is purely for cosmetic purposes, so it lets you change items' skins. In an efficient playthrough, it's not useful. Now, if you liked this video, I will send you a real-life dark sword, 100%, no scam, real-life dark sword, all right? Straight to your house, okay? I swear to God, they're not imaginary.